For now, I want to bring back Burke Ramsey's interview from June 1998. Now, for context, it was the first thing the cops decided to focus on after that major two-day presentation that led to the grand jury trial. Remember, it was the review of the police case. Remember, one of the major decisions after that review of 18 months worth of investigation and evidence, it wasn't just to speak to Burke, but also interview his friends and JonBenet's other playmates as well. In other words, focus less on adults and more on the children. And that then brings us to Burke's interview. It was 6 hours over 3 days. He had an attorney present. I think his name was Jim Jenkins. And we've only ever heard snippets from that interview. Lawrence Schiller provides a glossing over of the main aspects. We'll try and go into some of them into more detail of that interview, which I assume he may have gotten a summary or something, possibly from Burke's lawyer, who also provides a nice controlling narrative, a nice narrative conclusion to the whole interrogation. I mean, Burke's lawyer wraps it in a bow, which suggests the whole thing sort of has his spin on it.
I got nightmares in my head, I fear. Thoughts build up until I can't breathe. My mind fills up into a creature, and it haunts me somewhere much deeper. I got nightmares in my head.
Hello and welcome to True Crime Rocket Science, the most authentic voice in true crime. So let's begin. In this analysis, we're going to look at 3 insights from Burke Ramsey's 6-hour interview. So, number 1, Burke was defensive. Schiller writes, like any child, Burke was defensive, and this indicated that he wanted to forget the past. Within a short period of time, Burke developed a rapport with Detective Dan Schiller, who sensed that Burke was adjusting to the loss of his sister, and also had made some new friends and was doing well in school. Each day, the videotapes were taken to Jane Harmer's hotel room in Atlanta. This is Jane Harmer from the Boulder Police Department. And this part's also quite interesting, even quite troubling. In keeping with Hunter's agreement that the police would not be involved, Harmer wasn't even allowed to observe these interviews. The tapes were then shipped overnight to Boulder so that attorneys, that Kane and Boulder PD detectives could make recommendations to Schiller for the next day's interview sessions. So they wanted to keep the Boulder PD essentially out of it. When Schiller asked Burke if his mother and father had prepared him for their conversations, in other words, coached him, he said no. Burke said that he wasn't coached. Do you believe that? Think about also Burke's reaction to the pineapple. Was he told, whatever you say, don't mention anything about the pineapple? Now, I also think being defensive is appropriate to a point. I think if anyone is in a situation like that, you're going to feel defensive, even if you've done nothing wrong. We'll have to see whether that defensiveness becomes inappropriate, which is a subjective measure, of course, but perhaps a reasonable one. Perhaps there's a point where one can reasonably say his defensiveness seems a little inappropriate here. So certainly keep that thought in the back of your mind as we go on to the next insight. Number 2, did JonBenet do something that she deserved to die? And of course we want deserved in air quotes, right? Now clearly this is an unforgivably inappropriate question because JonBenet was an innocent child. But it's an entirely opposite question to get into the congruous criminal psychology, because certainly the criminal is going to think you deserve to die. And there's a lot of what you deserve and what someone else deserves in the ransom note, right? Now remember, one police theory was that JonBenet deserved, again in air quotes, deserved to die because she wet the bed. Another police theory was that JonBenet deserved to die, again deserved in air quotes, because she stole a piece of pineapple. In other words, JonBenet did something which then led to her death, and her killer perhaps felt that what he did was justified. Now, the one theory, as far as I'm concerned, the pineapple and the wetting the bed, the one theory is sillier than the next. But they become less and less silly when you start to build a contextual framework around the little girl. when you paint inside the lines of child psychology, and what you begin to see is she wasn't just any child. She was a child beauty queen. She was also a child in a very privileged home. And at the time, what was going on in that home were fairly high-stakes activities, including with John's business. So do you see, we must see the wetting of the bed in the loaded context of the pageants. That was another aspect that was giving a contextual framework to all of this. And also that child psychology must be seen within that context, not ordinary child psychology. The psychology of a child within a pageant and the stakes being higher on that particular child, and how that then reflected on the stakes of another child. And so let's just deal with the urine. Do child beauty queens smell of urine typically? Do child beauty queens wear urine-soaked dresses? Do child beauty queens smelling of urine, wearing urine-soaked dresses, win beauty contests? Also, when a child beauty queen is getting the lion's share of attention, and think about what a pageant is, it's all about attention and who deserves the most attention, who should get the most attention, who's the fairest of them all. What about at home? What about, is she also getting the lion's share of attention at home? Her outfits have got to be prepared, her appearance has got to be prepared, she's got to be washed and scrubbed and dressed up with a far more attention than, say, somebody else. But not only the lion's share of attention at home, but also perhaps at school, perhaps everywhere. And then on top of all of that, getting so much attention, stealing a piece of pineapple, perhaps that fell to someone like just another insult added to a pile of injuries, in terms of being undermined. And so in this respect, Dan Schuler asks Burke, what about, when you'd get stuck having to go to JonBenet's things? Those weren't the most fun things, were they? Those were pretty boring, huh? Burke Ramsey, yeah. Dan, did you ever have to go to, when she had dance lessons and things like that? Burke, yeah, I had to go to ballet and stuff. Dan, did you? How did you like that? Burke, it didn't last that long, but I was thankful. It was boring the short time it lasted. It was really bad the short time it has lasted. I think he means I was thankful that it didn't last long. Dan then says, what else did you have to go to that was really boring, with JonBenet when she had to do it? Burke says, that's about it. Now, we don't know whether Burke went to any of JonBenet's pageants. I also wonder what Burke means when he says it didn't last long and he was thankful. Does he mean that these rehearsals didn't go on for very long? Because I would think that they would go on for quite long. Or does he mean that phase of her life ended thankfully? I think perhaps that's reading a bit too much into it. Anyway, Lawrence Schuler goes on to write, gently, Schuler explored whether Burke thought his sister had sometimes been a bad girl and gotten mad at people. They discussed which people she got mad at and whether she had been mean and nasty to those people. Schuler asked Burke if his mother and father ever got really mad at his sister. If you think about it, some very good, simple, gentle, but leading questions. Burke said he didn't think so. And again, you've got to think about, if you think Patsy killed JonBenet, did anyone else notice Patsy losing her temper often, regularly? Did she ever freak out? And that doesn't seem to be the case. Schuler's most important question, never asked directly, again, so using subtlety here, was whether JonBenet had ever done something to bring about her death. Again, Burke answered no. Had she fallen and hit her head? In other words, could this have been an accident? He didn't remember her doing that. Now, I do seem to remember somewhere, I can't actually think of the source right now, where Burke seemed to remember his sister falling off her bike, after she tried riding it. But don't quote me on that. Now, of course, an adult interviewing a child forgets the most obvious thing that might make a child angry with another child. A child taking or breaking their toy. Or perhaps not getting the toy they really wanted for Christmas, especially around Christmas time. Or another child getting a better toy than they felt that they got. It's also not clear whether Schuler asked Burke about James Kolar's allegation of excrement smeared on JonBenet's box of candy. How did Burke feel about that? What did Burke think about that? Did Burke even know about that? And that brings us to halfway, the third and final point we're going to discuss in this analysis. Burke couldn't remember eating pineapple. Now, do you think that that's fair? Do you think he's being defensive, or do you think, well, it's 1998, a lot of time has gone by, he wouldn't remember what he ate that Christmas night? And so Dan Schuler says, can you tell me what this picture is? Well, maybe a photo can prod your memory. Burke says, that's the dining room table. And then Dan Schuler says, can you describe that to me? And then Burke says, it's a bowl of, and he pauses. And then he says, oh. And then he laughs. And then he says something. And then Dan says, okay. And I have to say, this transcript really doesn't capture the gravitas of the moment. I mean, you certainly get a sense of drama and tension when you watch it, when you listen to it. And so let's do that again.
Can you describe that to me?
Now, if you think about this statement in a general sense, you've shown a photo, and in the middle of the photo is a bowl of pineapple. Why on earth are you going to say, well, what I see is everything besides the bowl? I'm going to say, oh, what I see there's the dining room table. Now you've got to say to the child, okay, what do you see on the table? And then he's very reluctant to answer the question. He seems to take quite a long time, and look how he fiddles, look how he paws his elbow or his arm with his other hand, and just look at his body language. Does he seem tense? Does he seem reluctant to answer? Does he seem nervous? Is this a loaded moment? I mean, that word "oh" seems to be a kind of a gasp of something, doesn't it? And even Schiller's breezy overview in his book dealing with this aspect misses these little nuances. You know, Burke's pregnant paws, his left arm, as I say, nervously fidgeting, and the inappropriate laughter or chuckles when faced with this evidence. And you might say, yeah, it's a little child, but you had that same inappropriate smiling 20 years later on Dr. Phil. And then all of this, along with the fact that his own fingerprints were on the bowl, and the fact that a fragment of pineapple was found in JonBenet's digestive system, specifically her small intestine, in a sense, you could argue that this evidence brings, in theory, certainly, these two children together, to this table, to this bowl. Perhaps not this bowl, but bowls, or certainly to pineapple. Now remember, Burke's original version was that he'd last seen JonBenet alive when she was sleeping in the car, and then in some instances walking up the stairs of their home. In Steve Thomas's book, JonBenet Inside the Ramsey Murder Investigation, Burke said that his sister fell asleep in the car on the way home, but awakened to help carry presents into the house of a friend. Wouldn't that mean carrying presents into a house? JonBenet waking up to help Burke carry presents into the house of a friend. And didn't that mean they received presents as well? And which house was this? Which friend was this? And did someone in that house draw the heart on JonBenet's hand, perhaps after giving her a Christmas card? Thank you for listening, and I'll see you guys next time.